take my case. After I was knocked down, I was taken by ambulance to University College Hospital's A&E department, where they noted I had sustained a significant head injury plus multiple facial fractures. I received intubation. After a CT scan, I was transferred to intensive care, where I was to spend the next fortnight. Now, what's wrong with that? All that. How do I know this? You see, I've got absolutely no memory of being hit, nor of the following weeks, nor of the previous weeks. But I requested notes from the hospitals. I was treated in 3, and police records, such as they were, and I interrogated my family and the man who would become my husband, and to try and build together an understanding of what happened. So here's some of the factual information I gleaned. I arrived at UCH confused. I quickly lapsed into a coma. This was assessed at level 6 on the Glasgow coma scale. My brother was the first to see me. He said my head looked like a huge blue pumpkin with a large hole above my eye. When Alan arrived from Moscow, he thought there'd been some mistake. He didn't recognise me at all. He thought the body on the bed was somebody else. I was comatose for 3 days, and that was followed by a period of PTA of 5 or 6 weeks. Now, when I finally got around to reading your book, I learned, and I quote, that the longer the length of coma and PTA, the poorer will be the outcome. I was deemed to have suffered a very severe head injury, and the medical profession's expectations accorded to that. But your book very cunningly covers every eventuality. It says, there is a small group of individuals who have a severe or very severe injury who do exceptionally well. And that's the clinically imprecise category that I inhabit. Or possibly I'm in denial. But my main point is that you call it right when you say there are no absolute answers. Which leads to point 3. You may be familiar with the work of Thomas Kay and Muriel Lezac, who wrote a book about 10 years ago called Traumatic Brain Injury and Vocational Rehabilitation. And they set out to tackle the 10 myths of recovery, which they wanted to debunk. And one of those is spot on, that recovery occurs in a year. This myth is already out of date, I know, but I would suggest that setting any time limit on recovery is unwise. I mean, all the authorities are guarded. The Brain and Spine Foundation tells us that, as a general rule, recovery after a severe head injury takes many months. Some degree of recovery may continue for several years, especially in younger patients. I was 44 when I suffered a very severe head injury. I suffered from chronic fatigue for over 3 years. I had to sleep every afternoon, and then it just disappeared overnight. Coincidentally, during the week that the Metropolitan Police offered to settle the civil case I brought against them out of court, with the help of my union, the NUJ, and Thompson's, who was sponsoring tonight's event, which I didn't know. The sum that they offered wasn't enormous, but for me it signified a tacit admission of culpability, and I agreed, and my fatigue lifted. And 10 years on, there's still a way to go. I mean, I would reckon I still have about 15 kilos weight to lose. I lost weight alarmingly, as many people do in hospital, because I wasn't allowed to eat for weeks, because my body had forgotten how to swallow. And subsequently, I really piled on the pounds. I reached 14 stone before a sufficient degree of self-awareness was restored to allow me to stop asking for third helpings. Although I did actually eat the chief executive's spinach tonight. So, yes. You know, I haven't found any research into how appetite control is affected by brain injury. I'm sure it would be worthwhile. Anyway, recovery takes a long time, longer than a year. A lot longer than a year. Broken brains are not like broken bones. However, I take issue with these experts on one of their uncompromising statements about the aftermath of brain injury. We avoid phrases such as recovery after head injury. Almost never does a patient recover. The residual deficits are usually significant and permanent. We prefer to speak in terms of hope for as much improvement as possible to build in realistic expectations from the beginning. Well, that's all well and good. But from a lay perspective, I cautiously suggest that such an approach precludes some possible outcomes. I mean, my family didn't read their work, so they weren't drilled to think that a very severe head injury would inevitably lead to residual deficits. Nor, mind you, did they read my assessment carried out at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery in Queen's Square, which some of you may know. which was the hospital to which I was transferred after a fortnight in intensive care. And I was assessed by a clinical psychologist who, well, for instance, Sheena was given a formal test of word retrieval for expressive aphasia, showing simple pictures of everyday objects, cup, house, dog, car. She obtained a very impaired score, 3 out of 30. Verbal subtest scores were all borderline defective. Her current performance reflects a severe degree of intellectual underfunctioning, which isn't great when you're a broadcast journalist. Well, you may disagree, but before I went to my third hospital in Edinburgh, I was reassessed, and I didn't remember word lists. I knew I was the National, I didn't know it was March. Opinion, perhaps evidence for improvement, but cognitive memory severely impaired. A year after the injury, I saw my consultant at the National again, and he said, you've broken the rules. And I said, how? And he shrugged and he said, you tell us. Well, all I think is that the rules have to be rethought. Flaws in the carpet. A flaw in the carpet is a traditional sign of authenticity. And I certainly don't think recovery is a taboo word. Kay and Lizak also assert that family is critical, and you will all know that. I mean, it makes immeasurable difference having a supportive, stimulating, non-patronising family, which I did. Expressive aphasia. I want to say a little bit about what happens to your memory and your word-finding abilities after you've had a brain injury. Alan said I lapsed into what he called dream talk, grammatically correct rubbish. No, things have changed. I mean, they have. And he wrote this: in the days that followed, Sheena began to emerge very gradually into consciousness. Her speech was unimpaired. It was what she said that was alarming. No. Her sentences were grammatically flawless, but they made no sense. It was as though words had been dropped into the sentences at random. For instance, I said apparently, I'd like to go home soon. We will go home soon. That's like the statue. What statue? You know, like the holy animal. That's the religion, by the way. What, you mean like a cow? Could be a cow, or a kitten, or a hen. And I mean, it does sound funny, and it must have seemed very sort of black humour, because he didn't know if I was ever going to come back. For days she drifted in and out talking like this, each day getting a little stronger. Her periods of wakefulness grew more frequent. Each lasted a little longer. Each time I told her about the injury, it was as though she was hearing it for the first time and seemed surprised and alarmed. I don't know if you know the National Hospital in Queen's Square in London. There's a full-length portrait of the late Princess of Wales in the reception lobby. And Alan was trying to jog and he wouldn't tell me, but he did tell me this time. He said, who's that? And I didn't know, and he said, that's Princess Diana. And apparently, this is a black humour story he tells. He says, I thought about it for a while, and then I said, hasn't she had problems with her kids? And Alan thought, no, the kids, that's fine, husband, yeah. But anyway, and he said, no, she's actually, she's dead. And he says, I said, really? Not a lot of people know that. Which is simply an example of memory being so initially impaired by a head injury. Anyway, what